Today's points are nerfs. We have looked over the Exodia that formed in this 10.1.5 patch, made up of Guardian Druid, Holy Paladin, Augmentation Evoker, Fire Mage, and Shadow Priest. And a few days later, we have now gotten at least 2 of these specs being nerfed. One is Fire Mage. In fact, all of Mage has received a set of nerfs. Live this new reset, as well as the latest set of nerfs to Holy Paladin. So up to now, we have 2 out of 5 of the Exodia members being nerfed. Let's go over the set of nerfs of these specs, how heavy they were, and if there is any more need for some nerfs to these specs, or perhaps what about the specs that have currently gone under the radar and not nerfed yet. The first in line is a set of nerfs to mages. This one is more hefty, of course, for fire than they are for frost and for arcane. Frost at the moment is in a pretty unlucky situation in the sense that frost is quite strong. Frost is a pretty good spec now. Unfortunately, when it comes to single target and the raid, they are just weaker than arcane. And when it comes to Mythic Plus and AoE, they are just weaker than Fire. So they find themselves in a pretty awkward situation when it comes to their state in the meta right now. Perhaps that might be also why the nerfs to Frost Mage are the least bad, the least heavy of the Mage nerfs. The heaviest one goes, of course, to Fire. Fire has received a nerf by 5% to all abilities damage, as well as, on top of that, 6% nerf to Flame Strike, to Flame Patch, as well as now the scaling of the damage beyond 8 targets has also been reduced. Now, the majority of the groups, the majority of the casual plus 20 key weekly groups won't really care about these 2 nerfs. It will hit them more to be nerfed in here. However, for the more coordinated groups, for the higher key pushers, this is definitely what is going to be the more hurtful. That's because the new meta was to essentially pull 3 to 4 to 5 packs together, have an Augmentation Evoker, lay out all of the buffs, use Breath of Eons, and then have the mages pull 2 million DPS. This was possible due to the damage done to multiple targets, to 20 plus targets with Flame Strike and Flame Patch. Now they don't scale nearly as hard beyond 8 targets. So if you really want to be precise, beyond 20 targets, this is even upwards of a 40+% damage nerf to Fire Mage. Now, if we stay within the 8 target cap of an average Mythic Plus pool, then this one is roughly a 10% damage nerf for Fire in AoE, and 5 to 6% damage nerf in single target. Now, when you look at the current damage of Fire Mage, you can see, for example, that in the raid, they are still doing quite high damage overall when it comes to single target primarily. You can then look at the abomination that is Mythic Plus. Just look at the average DPS of a Fire Mage compared to the rest of the specs. We are talking about being comfortably 20% DPS ahead of most of other DPS specs. So even if this week the Fire has been nerfed by 10%, this 167,000 damage would go down to roughly 151,000 DPS, which, as you can see, it's still ahead. It's still more than enough to still be comfortably ahead than the majority of the other specs. So this is still going to keep Fire Mage as a competitive spec in the raid and still the best spec in Mythic Plus, even after this pretty hefty set of nerfs. As I said, for Frost Mage, it's a little bit more of a sad nerf in the sense that, as you can see, they are doing well in Mythic Plus, but not nearly as well to just be overpowering everyone else. And then in the raid, Frost Mage is actually amongst the weakest ones, so not really as good of a nerf. Arcane, funnily enough, has been probably overshadowed in the raid by Fire, but still their DPS is currently the highest overall raid DPS right now, and their nerf still is not nearly as heavy as Fire, plus they will still remain a more wanted spec in the raid compared to Mythic Plus, which right now seems to be the bigger issue when it comes to the state of the must-have picks in Mythic Plus right now. The other nerf, which is also the freshest nerf, is the one to Holy Paladin. This one is much more simple because it just doesn't go over multiple abilities, it just goes very straight. 8% healing nerf, 12% damage nerf, and 15% less healing to Tears Deliverance. Now this will net to be roughly a 10% nerf to the healing of Holy Paladin and a 12% damage nerf. Now when it comes to the damage of Holy Paladin, their Mythic Plus damage is of course an issue. As you can see here, they have vastly more damage than anyone else. So even being nerfed by 12% will still bring them still clearly ahead of every other healer. So this 12% damage nerf bringing their 35.7 thousand DPS down to 32 is not really going to change the fact that Holy Paladins have the highest damage in Mythic Plus. Now, what is the current actual issue of Holy Paladin when it comes to this nerf? The issue is that right now these type of nerfs are fine. However, they don't go and target some of the bigger issues that have been created with this rework of Holy Paladin. One of the issues being that right now Holy Paladin gets to heal very easily and very safely, for example in Mythic Plus, without actually doing too much. If you look at this average healing from a Holy Paladin in Mythic Plus, you will notice that Greater Judgment, being the passive effect from you doing damage with Judgment, as well as Beacon of Light, especially passive if you play with the Beacon of Faith double beacon style, and then you have Overflowing Light, the talent for your Glimmer to turn into an Absorb Shield, and then Fading Light, yet another talent that gives passive healing. Overall, this can mount up to be over 35% of your total healing being basically passive, basically in the background, you know, automatically triggering this type of style of healing. When you consider most of the other healing specs, for example, specs like Monk, you can see most of the heals of Monk are directed, targeted. You must click something to heal in return. When you look at Resto Druid, yes, the healing profile of Resto Druid looks depressing, but still, those are still buttons you have to press. You have Preservation Evoker, same thing. Holy Priest, the mastery comes from clicking your buttons, and then you have Resto Shaman, does the same thing. Holy Paladin, on the other hand, seems to have way more of these powerful effects like Overflowing Light over here, or the newly reworked Infusion of Light to double the amount of the Absorb given by Judgment, together with Inflorescence of the Sunwell to increase the Absorb of Judgment even more. It gives a lot of safety, a lot of freedom to do other things during the pool of Mythic Plus, for example, because of the amount of passive healing you have during the key. So nerfing the healing overall by 8% is not that big of a change. They will still be the easiest, highest HPS healer in Mythic Plus. Not that the HPS in Mythic Plus is very relevant, of course, but still, it's still the strongest. And then in the raid, they might be brought a little bit more close in. Right now, this, for example, is the healing of Holy Paladin in the raid. Their median is 161. The average median healing of the rest of the healers is roughly 143 to 144. So if we were to nerf this healing by roughly 10%, you know, it would get somewhat close to the rest of the healers. So it would be slightly better in terms of balance when it comes to raiding. However, raiding is not the main balance issue right now. Right now, at this time of the season, it's more of an issue when it comes to Mythic Plus. If you look at this, for example, these are the highest DPS keys in Mythic Plus right now. And that's Paladin. And I didn't even choose a super high key where there is only Holy Paladins available, because nobody picks any other spec other than Paladin above a 25 range, even if I go down to something like a 22 key, which is even more accessible to even more healers. You know, congratulations to the 1 Discipline, the 2 Resto Shamans, and the 1 Mistweaver Monk to break the combo, but in general, it's just Holy Paladin. So 12% damage nerf is not going to be enough to break this gap in terms of damage in Mythic Plus, as well as the 8% Ely nerf, roughly 10% overall. It's more hurtful in the raid than in Mythic Plus, because in the raid you have more usage, more value of Tears Deliverance. So Tears Deliverance being nerfed by 15% is gonna impact the raid more than it does Mythic Plus. But the TLDR for both of the Mage nerfs, especially the fire ones, and the Holy Paladin nerfs is that it's actually not gonna change anything. Holy Paladin will still remain the strongest healer, both in the raid and in Mythic Plus. It will still remain the highest damage dealer in terms of healer DPS in Mythic Plus, regardless of these two nerfs. Same goes for Fire Mage. Fire Mage will continue to have the strongest AoE damage in Mythic Plus, even after these nerfs. So it's, I guess, nice that they have been targeted, but still not actually enough to change anything about the situation with the most played specs right now in Mythic Plus. Now, to finish with the question we started with at the beginning of the video, are these two nerfs the only one that will reach the Exodia comp of Mythic Plus? Because right now, we have talked about the nerf going to Holy Paladin. 2/3 of all of the high key healers are Paladins right now. We have talked about the nerfs going to Fire Mage, which is still not nearly as popular as Shadow Priest and Augmentation, but it's making its way up, especially when it comes to the very highest of keys. It's always the same comp. So the question is, what about Guardian Druid? The question is, what about Augmentation Evoker? And of course, what about Shadow Priest, which is the only one across this entire gang of specs which was not changed in the patch, because Fire Mage was reworked, Augmentation is new, Holy Paladin was reworked, and Guardian was buffed. The only one that received nothing was Shadow Priest. Yet, they are still doing just as strong as before. So are we going to see more nerfs coming to try to add more variety and more diversity to this set of specs for the composition of Mythic Plus? So I would positively discard Augmentation, as we have gotten devs going on record to point out that they are more strongly against nerfing Augmentation before the release of Season 3. Basically, the TLDR is we have to see, you know, this second part of Season 2, we want to keep Augmentation with the same level of power to see how it performs over time, how players adjust to this spec before we start changing the spec. The spec is new, you know, nerfing the spec just 1 or 2 weeks into the patch might be too quick, so we want to have more time to fix this spec. But for the others, right, for the others that are not new, for the others that are not new specs coming out for the first time ever, like Shadow Priest or like Guardian Druid, are we going to see some nerfs? I am going to say probably not. I don't think even with some minor tiny nerf is going to change much of anything. Right now, most of the keys have been pushed to a certain degree where these type of tanks won't be able to match up anymore. They won't be able to go this high and compete with these keys anyways. So even if some slight nerfs might go Guardian Druid's way, maybe the only thing that will change will be slightly increasing Vengeance Demon Hunter players, for example. Same goes for the range DPS. I don't think there is any more room at the moment to nerf Shadow Priest. Shadow Priest right now is still anyways bringing too much utility, things like Master Spell, things like Power Infusion, things that won't really be replaced even if you nerf Shadow Priest and look for some other specs to be brought in replacement of Shadow Priest. So I don't think we will get much more of anything in terms of something that could shake this comp up in the near future, which is, you know, you can see it as a sad thing because there is still like 3 or something months before the release of Season 3, so this is likely what you will continue to be seeing whenever you start reaching certain key levels. You don't even have to be anywhere close to be this high to start seeing groups asking for a Druid or a Paladin or an Augmentation Evoker, etc, etc. So I think this will continue for the duration of the second half of Season 2 before we start getting closer and closer to Season 3. So basically, unfortunately, the TLDR of today's nerfs is not really gonna change anything. Not really gonna move out these specs like Fire and Holy Paladin from the S tier they are currently at. You would have needed way more hefty nerfs for that to happen. With this done with, this is all we have for today, surprisingly, in terms of balance tuning. 1 week after the release of 10.1.5, only 4 specs, I guess, have been touched by Blizzard. We will see in the near future if we get any more tuning, but for now, this is all we have. So, thanks as usual to all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and help to the growth of the channel. You can still support as usual completely for free. You can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, It's not nearly as bad to try to make videos with 37 degrees, but still, I would rather that not be the case.